This is a murder case that's gone unsolved for 5,300 years. In 1991, two hikers in the Alps stumbled onto a body buried in a glacier. At first glance, they assumed it was a climber who'd died recently. But the medical examiners were stunned by what they found. There was undigested food in his stomach, his skin was intact, and his gear was all neatly in place. But when they dated the body, the time of death came back as 3,300 BCE, centuries older than the Great Pyramid of Giza. Scientists from around the world rushed in and studied the body for over 30 years. And the more they found, the less they could sleep. Finding number 1. He didn't die by accident. Deep in his left shoulder was a flint arrowhead, only found in a 2001 X-ray scan. It had struck the subclavian artery. Massive blood loss was the direct cause of death. Finding number 2. He'd eaten just hours before he died. A 2018 study of his stomach contents, published in Current Biology, showed his last meal had ibex and red deer meat, einkorn wheat, and traces of fern. It was very high in calories. He was fueling up for something physically demanding. Finding number 3. The webbing of his right hand had a deep cut that reached the bone. It had started to heal but hadn't fully closed. They judged it was made 1 to 2 days before his death. This is a classic defensive wound from hand-to-hand combat. It shows that just before he was killed, he'd been in a close-quarters fight. Finding number 4. Traces of other people's blood were found on his clothes and tools. A man bearing the marks of a fight finished his last meal, then was shot from behind on a glacier over 3,000 meters up. Who killed him? After 5,300 years, there's still no answer. But every wound on his body is like a clue left deliberately for us. Scientists named the body, Otzi the Iceman, after the Ötztal Valley where he was found. But don't think the story ends there. The truly mind-blowing part is only just getting started. Scientists gave him a full-body CT scan, and found this guy had more than 60 tattoos. And note, not modern sleeve-style designs, but groups of parallel lines and small crosses, made by rubbing charcoal into pricked skin. More importantly, these tattoos cluster around the joints, the lower back, knees, ankles, and wrists. Imaging showed most of these areas had degenerative joint disease. The tattoo locations closely match where his body would have hurt. So some researchers suspect this was an early form of therapeutic stimulation, similar in principle to acupuncture. If so, it would predate any written record of such therapy by thousands of years. The findings sparked years of debate in academic circles. Someone in the comments is bound to ask, who exactly was this man? An ordinary hunter couldn't have had gear like this. Consider this, in 3300 BCE Europe, copper tools were extremely rare. Owning a copper axe meant very high social status. His bow was made of yew wood, about 1.8 meters long. Yew was the best bow-making wood of the era. Excellent flexibility and strength. But this bow wasn't finished yet. His quiver held 14 arrows, but only 2 had arrowheads fitted. The rest were only half made. He also wore a coat sewn together from several kinds of animal hide, stitched from a mix of goatskin and deerskin. His shoes were made of deerskin and bearskin, stuffed with hay for insulation and warmth. A 2016 genetic study confirmed the animal sources of these hides, showing how carefully he chose his materials. The craftsmanship would put plenty of today's outdoor brands to shame. So scientists concluded he was likely someone of high standing in his tribe. But here's the question. Why would someone of such high status be alone on a glacier more than 3,200 meters above sea level? Using strontium isotope analysis, scientists measured trace element ratios in his tooth enamel, bones, and gut contents. The results showed he grew up in the Eisack Valley of eastern South Tyrol, in today's Italy. As an adult, he mostly stayed within about 50 kilometers, on the southern slopes of the Alps. But in his final days, he moved quickly from the low-lying south up into the high glacier zone. Combined with the not-yet-healed fight wound on his hand, and the fact that his bow was unfinished and his arrows unfitted, scientists offered a reasonable theory. He left in a hurry, most likely fleeing some kind of conflict. He may have been caught in a violent encounter at lower altitude, and retreated toward the high mountains after being wounded. He thought that once he crossed the glacier, he'd be safe. The arrow came from behind. Based on the angle it entered his shoulder, it was fired from the lower left, behind him. The killer stood slightly below him, an estimated few dozen meters away. A single arrow hit the artery. He had almost no chance to fight back. Even stranger, the killer didn't take the extremely valuable copper axe he was carrying. If it were a robbery, no one would leave behind the most valuable item. If it was a revenge killing, then all the killer wanted was his life. But the biggest shock to archaeology was still to come. In 2012, scientists completed the full genome sequencing of Otzi the Iceman. In 2023, the journal Cell Genomics published a reanalysis using the latest techniques. The data showed more than 90% of his genome came from early Anatolian farmers. The steppe nomad ancestry once expected to be significant was almost entirely absent. His genome also had very low heterozygosity, meaning his group was heavily inbred. A small population, relatively isolated. Even more surprising, genetic prediction says he most likely had dark skin and dark eyes, and carried a genetic predisposition to male pattern baldness. In other words, he had probably already started going bald. But for the previous 30 years, the Otzi reconstructions in museums worldwide all showed pale skin, light eyes, and a thick head of dark, curly hair. After the 2023 paper, the South Tyrol Museum of Archaeology said its reconstruction needed updating. The image everyone had pictured for 30 years was a world away from the real man. And there's more. A 2016 study found ancient DNA of Helicobacter pylori in his stomach. Analysis showed his strain was completely different from the one common in modern Europe, and more closely related to modern Asian strains. This shows that over 5,000 plus years, as people migrated and intermixed, even the bacteria in our guts changed dramatically. One body's gut actually helped scientists fill in a missing piece of Eurasia's migration history. But you might think scientists only focused on the body itself. Not so. Around the Iceman there's also a topic debated for years, the curse of Otzi. In the dozen-plus years after he was found, several people tied to the discovery and early research died one after another. They included Helmut, a mountain guide who helped carry the body out. In 2004, he died in a blizzard while hiking in the Alps. Rainer Henn, the forensic scientist who handled the early autopsy, died in a car crash in 2004. The media began hyping it as a European version of the Pharaoh's curse. Of course, statisticians pointed out that hundreds of people worked on the Iceman project. A few dying of various causes over more than a decade is statistically completely normal. It's nothing supernatural. Still, whenever a new team takes over, colleagues can't help joking. Remember to buy life insurance. Today, Otzi is kept at the South Tyrol Museum of Archaeology in Bolzano, Italy. He's housed in a custom cold chamber kept at -6°C, with humidity around 98%, mimicking the preservation conditions inside a glacier. Through a small window, visitors can see his curled-up body. More than 300,000 people come here every year just to catch a glimpse of him. He is the most completely preserved natural frozen mummy from the Copper Age ever found, bar none. On that afternoon 5,300 years ago, a middle-aged man finished his last bite of deer meat high in the mountains. He leaned against a rock, perhaps still planning his escape. Then an arrow flew in from behind and pierced his left shoulder. He collapsed onto the glacier, his blood seeping slowly into the snow, and the world fell silent. 5,300 years later, we use genome sequencing, CT scans, and isotope analysis to piece together, bit by bit, the picture of his final days. But the person who fired that fatal arrow with such precision from dozens of meters away, we will never find. Time preserved everything about the victim.